My name is Michael Horse. I'm from the Yaqui, Mescalero, and Zuni nations. I was born on the Pascua Indian Reservation, which is south of Tucson. Moved to Los Angeles. My grandfather got sent out there in the relocation program, and I lived out there um, till about the last 3 or 4 years, and I live in the Bay Area now, which I really like. Um, I'm a graduate of the Indian Art Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Alan Hauser, the great sculptor teacher, was one of my teachers, and I started sculpting, and then I was making jewelry. My whole family are jewelers. I come from a long line of jewelers. Some of my tools have been handed down through the family. They're 100 years old. But I worked for some of the museums. I worked for the Hay Foundation, the Museum of the American Indian in New York, and I worked for the Southwest Museum and the Autry Museum of Western Heritage in Los Angeles. And especially the Southwest Museum has an incredible collection of native art. And I would get into their archives and I would see what's called ledger art. We used to paint on hides. It was our history book, our calendar. There was what was called a winter count, which would be little pictures reminding us of everything that would happen throughout the year, or something significant that had happened, a holy person being born, or a battle, or a meteor shower. Then, about 1835 or so, a reservation period, the buffalo were harder to come across the hides, and we were introduced to scrap paper. And it's called ledger art because most of these paintings were done on the ledger papers that came out of the books that were sent from the government to the reservation transactions, goods, commodities, but any piece of scrap paper that was around, love letters, old Bibles, military papers. And I was fascinated by this art form because I realized this was my history from my point of view. Like, I've actually seen um, Yellowbird's pictorial of the Battle of Little Bighorn. It's on a big piece of muslin, and for years everybody said, "Oh, this is the way it happened." And Custer stood up here, and the Sioux wrote it down, and they knew how it actually happened. Um, it, this particular map here, this is a Santa Fe Railroad paper, and it's all the ranches and remudas where they got all the horses and the cattle from. All the actual the brands are still in here, and usually the painting didn't go with the text because we couldn't read. But over the years, I've started to put the painting with the text. It's kind of my social statement, and every now and then I would see these little figures above the heads, and I wasn't quite sure. And one of my elders said, "These are how people were identified. This is their name." So I get to name everybody. This is Medicine Pipe and Hailstorm. And a lot of times people say, well, there wasn't purple horses or green horses. And anybody, I've worked around cattle and horses my whole life, that really studies these animals can see the shades of reds and yellows and blues and purples that are in these animals. And we knew that. Trains are really fascinating to me because if you know anything about herd animals, if you put anything in their way, not just a fence but anything, it breaks their cycle of their migration habits. So here was this iron road that changed the migration of the buffalo and the elk and the deer, and then coming from the east, this big piece of iron that made a bad smell and made noise, and it must have been a pretty frightening sight to all the indigenous people of that time. Ledger art is also it's a precursor to a lot of native art. It's a style that was enhanced upon in the 20s, especially by the Kiowas and the Comanches, and a lot of modern indigenous art gets its start from this form of Aboriginal art form. This